I still remember the first time I set foot inside the forgotten hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for decades after a mysterious series of disappearances of patients and staff, and the locals whispered that something evil lingered within its walls. The building loomed like a dark shadow through the overgrown weeds and rusted gates, the windows shattered and blackened with smoke and decay. I had always been fascinated by the paranormal and had spent countless nights exploring abandoned places, but something about this hospital felt different, like it was alive and waiting for me. I packed a flashlight, a small camera, and a bottle of water, and walked up the cracked path leading to the main entrance. My heart pounded as I pushed the heavy metal doors open, and the smell of mold and decay hit me like a wave. I stepped inside, and the echo of my footsteps bounced off the walls lined with peeling paint and broken tiles. The air was thick, cold, and suffocating, as if the building itself was breathing. I shined my flashlight down the long hallway and saw rooms on either side, their doors hanging crooked and broken medical equipment scattered across the floors. I could hear faint noises. At first I thought it was rats scratching in the walls, but then came the whispers, soft and urgent, calling my name. I froze, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. My flashlight flickered as I stepped deeper into the hospital, each corridor darker than the last. I passed a room with an overturned gurney and a broken wheelchair lying beside it, and on the wall I noticed old photographs of patients, their faces scratched out, but their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I tried to tell myself it was only my mind playing tricks, but then I heard a low moan coming from upstairs, a sound of pain and despair so raw it made my stomach turn. I wanted to leave, but something drew me forward. Curiosity, fear, and obsession, all mixing together as I climbed the staircase, the steps creaking under my weight. The second floor was even worse, the walls stained with water and blood remnants, long, dried but still visible in the flickering light. My flashlight caught movement in a doorway, and I froze, a shadowy figure of a nurse standing perfectly still, her face obscured in darkness, and I whispered to myself, "It is nothing. It is nothing," but deep down, I knew I had made a mistake coming here. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move down the hallway, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Every step echoed louder than the last, the walls seemingly closing in around me, and I could feel a cold draft brushing against my neck, making my skin crawl. I passed a room with its door hanging on broken hinges, and the faint smell of chemicals still lingered in the air. Inside, I saw old medical charts scattered across the floor, and a gurney with a torn sheet draped over it. Something about the room made my stomach turn, and I almost ran, but curiosity held me in place. As I moved further, I began to hear whispers again, faint at first, but growing stronger every second. I stopped and tried to listen. They were saying words I did not understand, calling my name over and over. I shook my head, trying to clear it, telling myself it was only echoes of the wind, but then I saw a shadow move across the far end of the corridor. My heart raced. I pointed my flashlight toward it, but there was nothing there, only darkness swallowing the end of the hall. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a rat, maybe a curtain blowing in the wind, but the sound of footsteps behind me made me spin around. Nothing was there yet. I could feel the presence watching me, every nerve in my body screaming to leave. I continued forward, drawn by some force I did not understand. The building seemed alive, each creak of the floorboards and drip of water echoing like a heartbeat. I reached a stairwell that led to the top floor, and a wave of dread hit me the moment. I looked up. The stairs were dark as pitch, and I could see shapes moving in the shadows. I swallowed hard and stepped onto the first step, the wood groaning beneath my weight, and as I ascended higher, the whispers grew louder until they were all around me, repeating my name. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out, my voice swallowed by the cold, oppressive air. On the landing, I saw a long corridor lined with patient rooms, the doors closed, but I could see faint light flickering from underneath them. One by one, the doors began to creak open, revealing darkness within, and the smell of decay so strong it made me gag. I forced myself forward, every instinct telling me to run, my mind screaming that I should leave, but something deeper inside pulled me onward into the heart of the forgotten hospital. As I stepped into the first room on the corridor, my flashlight flickered violently, making the shadows dance across the walls. The air inside was thick and heavy, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic, mixed with something metallic that made my stomach churn. I froze when I saw it, a figure sitting upright. On the edge of the bed, a woman dressed in a tattered nurse's uniform, her face obscured in darkness. I whispered to myself, "It is nothing. It is nothing," but my body refused to move. The figure tilted her head slowly as if studying me, her movements unnatural and jerky. A low moan escaped her lips, filling the room with a sound of pain and despair that made my ears ring. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt glued to the floor, my heart hammering in my chest. The light from my flashlight caught her eyes for a brief second, and I saw them glowing faintly red, staring straight through me. She raised one hand, slowly pointing toward me, and I felt a cold wave sweep across my body, my limbs trembling uncontrollably. Behind her, the shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch and flicker, forming shapes that resembled patients lying on gurneys and moving in slow, distorted motions. I swallowed hard, trying to speak, but my voice was gone. No sound came out. Then the whispering started again, surrounding me from every direction, calling my name, repeating words I could not understand over and over. I stumbled backward, hitting the wall behind me, my flashlight dropping to the floor and spinning wildly, illuminating glimpses of the room in terrifying fragments. The nurse rose from the bed, her movements fluid now, almost gliding toward me, the floorboards creaking under her weight. Though no sound should have been made, I scrambled toward the door, barely keeping my balance, my mind screaming that I had to leave before it was too late. As I reached the doorway, the shadows seemed to surge forward, attempting to block my escape, and the whispers reached a crescendo, making my head spin with nausea and fear. I stepped through the door and slammed it shut behind me, my breathing ragged, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and for a moment I thought I had escaped. But then I heard the faint sound of the nurse's moan following me down the hallway, and I realized I was not safe anywhere inside the forgotten hospital. I could feel my hands shaking as I reached the end of the corridor, where a heavy metal door marked with faded letters said basement. The air around it was colder than anywhere else in the hospital, and the smell of mold and decay was almost unbearable. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity pushed me forward, and I turned the handle, the door creaking loudly as it swung open. A narrow staircase led down into darkness, my flashlight barely illuminating the steps, and I descended slowly, each creak echoing through the void. At the bottom, the corridor opened into a large ward filled with rows of empty beds covered in tattered sheets. The ceiling had collapsed in places, letting in streaks of pale moonlight, and the walls were lined with strange markings scratched deep into the plaster. As I moved forward, I noticed shadows flickering in the corners of the room, and the faint sound of whispers began again. I pointed my flashlight at one of the beds and froze. A figure lying there slowly raised its head, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes staring straight at me. My chest tightened, and I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take another step, and then another, as more figures began to stir from the beds, some sitting upright, some crawling toward the walls, but all watching me intently. I could hear the faint rattling of chains coming from the far side of the ward, and the whispers were now louder and more distinct, repeating my name over and over. My mind screamed to run, but my body felt heavy, as if the shadows themselves were holding me in place. I stumbled toward the center of the ward, and my flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of old medical equipment covered in rust and dried blood. Then I saw a long row of wheelchairs all facing me, and in each one a small figure sat staring silently, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I turned to leave, but the stairwell was gone, replaced by a solid wall of darkness, and the whispers now surrounded me from every direction. I realized with a chill that the basement was not just part of the building. It was alive and aware, and it did not want me to leave. I backed away slowly as the shadows seemed to converge around me, their whispers growing louder and sharper, each one calling my name over and over. My flashlight flickered violently, illuminating a figure emerging from the far corner. A tall, gaunt man wearing tattered hospital scrubs, his eyes hollow and black, and a twisted smile stretching across his face. I froze, telling myself it is nothing, but deep down I knew it was real. He raised one hand slowly, and I could see long, jagged fingers reaching toward me, and the air around him shimmered with a coldness so intense it made my bones ache. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, my mind screaming to run, but my legs refused to obey. The shadowed patients in the wheelchairs began to move toward me, their eyes glowing faintly, and their whispers now forming words I could almost understand. The man's smile grew wider, and he spoke a single sentence so low and guttural it sent chills down my spine. "Leave, and you will never escape." I screamed and swung my flashlight at him, but it passed right through his form, as if he was made of smoke. I turned to run toward what I thought was the stairwell, but the floor seemed to stretch endlessly, and the walls bent in impossible angles, trapping me inside. I could hear the moans of the nurse from before, and the creaking of beds moving by themselves, all around me. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my hands trembling as I realized the hospital had claimed me the moment I set foot inside, and no matter how far I ran or how hard I tried, the building would not let me go. I stumbled into a small room at the far end, and it was empty except for a single chair in the center, and on it lay an old medical chart with my name written on it. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo as I collapsed to my knees, and the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me completely was the gaunt man and the nurse standing side by side, watching me with glowing eyes. I woke up on the cold floor, my head spinning, and my vision blurred, as if the darkness itself was pressing in on me. The whispers had not stopped. They had only grown louder, repeating my name over and over in 1,000 distorted voices. I tried to stand, but my legs wobbled beneath me, and I could feel something brushing against my skin in the shadows, making me shiver uncontrollably. Every corner of the room seemed to shift and bend, and I could swear the walls were closing in and breathing around me. I saw glimpses of the nurse moving across the hallways, her face twisted and horrifying, then disappearing before I could focus. My flashlight was on the floor, and the beam danced wildly across broken equipment and tattered sheets, revealing glimpses of faces staring at me from the darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, only a choking rasp that echoed off the walls. Time seemed meaningless, as the hospital played tricks on my mind. Every step I took, the floors stretching and contracting beneath me. I could see shadows forming figures in the corners of my eyes, only to vanish when I looked directly at them. And the whispers were now chanting phrases I could almost understand, urging me to stay forever. I stumbled down a hallway, lined with patient rooms, the doors now swinging open and closed on their own, revealing more figures sitting silently watching me move. I felt as if the hospital itself was alive, breathing and watching and learning from my fear, and the thought that I might never leave twisted in my stomach. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to stop the ringing in my ears and the visions in my mind. But nothing helped, and I realized that the hospital had become a part of me, and I a part of it. And the longer I stayed, the more it consumed. Every thought, every memory, every shred of sanity I had left. Stumbled down a narrow corridor that I had never noticed before, the walls covered in peeling paint and strange markings scratched into the plaster. A faint light flickered from under a heavy metal door, and I knew instinctively this was a place no one was meant to see. My hands shook as I pushed the door open, revealing a hidden ward lined with rusted beds and shattered medical equipment. The air was thicker here, heavy with decay and the smell of something metallic and sharp. On the far wall I saw rows of cages, small and dark, their bars twisted and broken, and inside them the shadows of children huddled together, rocking back and forth, silently staring at me with hollow eyes. I froze, unable to move, my heart pounding, as a low moan began to fill the room, echoing off the walls. Papers and charts littered the floor, old records with names scratched out, but some still legible, and my eyes fell on a familiar name, mine, written in fading ink, along with a date from years before I had ever entered the hospital. Panic surged through me as I realized the hospital had been waiting for me, my life recorded long before I had set foot inside. Behind me, the shadows began to stir, and the nurse appeared at the end of the ward, her glowing eyes fixed on me, and the gaunt man from before stepped from the darkness, his smile wider than ever. I tried to back away, but my legs refused to obey, and the whispers rose into a deafening chorus, calling my name and repeating phrases that I could not comprehend. The hidden ward was alive, each bed, each cage, each shadow waiting for the next arrival. And I knew with chilling certainty that I was not just a visitor. I was a part of it now, and there was no escape from what lurked inside the forgotten hospital. Realized too late that I was completely trapped inside the hospital, the corridors twisting impossibly around me as if the building itself had grown overnight. Every door I tried led me back to the same dark hallway, and the whispers followed me like a living entity pressing into my mind. The shadows in the corners grew bolder now, forming shapes that resembled the patients I had seen earlier, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I stumbled into a room filled with overturned gurneys and rusted medical instruments, and felt something brush against my shoulder, making me gasp and spin around, but there was nothing. The nurse appeared in the doorway, her glowing eyes fixed on me, and the gaunt man emerged from the shadows beside her, their presence overwhelming and suffocating. I ran down the hall, my flashlight flickering and the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo, repeating my name over and over. Every step felt like wading through thick water, the floorboards groaning and the walls closing in. I reached a stairwell, only to find it led me back to the basement, the same hidden ward with cages and shadowy figures rocking silently in the dark. The hospital seemed alive, breathing and shifting around me, feeding on my fear and despair, and I realized with a chill that I was never meant to leave. The whispers formed words I could now understand, warning me that I belonged here, that the hospital had been waiting for me, and my fate was sealed. I sank to my knees in the center of the ward, the shadows closing in surrounding me, and the last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the nurse and the gaunt man smiling at me in unison, their eyes glowing red and the echoes of whispers repeating one final phrase: "You will never escape." Time has lost all meaning here in the forgotten hospital, the corridors stretching endlessly, and the shadows never leaving my side. I wander through rooms filled with broken beds and rusted medical equipment, my flashlight flickering constantly, revealing glimpses of figures that vanish the moment I look directly at them. The whispers never stop calling my name, repeating phrases I now understand: "You belong here forever," and every corner I turn only leads me deeper into the heart of the building. I have tried to escape countless times, but the walls shift, the floors twist, and the stairwells lead me back to the hidden ward where the cages and shadowy children wait silently. The nurse and the gaunt man follow me wherever I go, their glowing eyes fixed on me, and the low moans and creaks of the building fill my mind until I can barely think. I have lost track of days, months, maybe even years, my memory fading into the endless darkness. I am no longer a visitor. I am part of the hospital now, my name written in the old records, my fate sealed long before I arrived. The whispers tell me to take my place among the shadows, to watch and wait for the next curious soul who dares to enter, and I understand that I will never leave, that the hospital will always claim me, and any who follow will join us in this eternal nightmare. And so I sit in the hidden ward, the shadows around me rocking silently, waiting for the next arrival, knowing that the forgotten hospital has consumed me completely, and that the building itself is alive, feeding on fear, despair, and souls, and it will continue to do so forever without end.